The last time Ray Callum saw Petra before she walked into Courtroom 14 on a Wednesday in March, she was 9 years old, 41 pounds underweight, and asleep on a heating grate outside his construction office on Beller Street. That was 17 years, 3 months, and 8 days ago. He had brought her a sandwich first, then a blanket, and she had looked at him with the flat, measuring gaze of a child who had been lied to by adults for long enough that she had developed a system for sorting the liars from the rest. And something in what she saw had passed her test, because she ate the sandwich and did not run. By the time the state got involved 3 weeks later, Ray had already hired a family attorney and applied to foster her. And by the time the process was finished, which took 14 months and cost him more in legal fees than he had budgeted for anything that year, she was his. He had given her his name. She had given him, though he did not know it yet, the only thing standing between his company and a man who intended to take everything. Ray Callum built things. He had started Callum Construction out of a 2-bay garage in his late 20s with a $40,000 spa loan and a commercial license and a reputation among subcontractors for paying on time, which in the construction industry was the kind of reputation that spread faster than any advertisement. The office on Beller Street still had a pinboard above the main desk where Ray tracked active projects on index cards, not because software didn't exist for it, but because he had started the habit when he had 4 projects running and kept it when there were 22. Because the cards were physical, and the physical reminded him what was real. On that board in the final week of February sat 7 white cards and 1 red one, which was the color he used for problems that had no clear solution yet, and it bore a single line in his own handwriting: Fitch, injunction, 46 days. He looked at it every morning and turned his back on it every morning, which was not denial so much as sequencing. He believed in finishing what was in front of him before he turned to face what was coming. It had served him for 19 years. He was not certain it would be enough for what was coming now. 19 years later, the company ran $22 million in annual revenue, employed 61 people, and had its name on 2 civic buildings, a bridge rehabilitation project, and a hospital wing in the county where Ray had grown up. He was 53 now, and he worked the same hours he had worked at 34, and his hands still showed it. He had never married, a fact his sister described as a choice and Ray described as an outcome, and Petra had been the family he had, and he had not thought of that as insufficient for a single day of the 17 years she had been in it. The thing he had built his life around protecting, besides Petra, was the company. Specifically, a $14.8 million public infrastructure contract with the County Transportation Authority, awarded 18 months ago, that was now the subject of a civil lawsuit filed by a man named Gerald Fitch. Gerald Fitch was the president of a competing construction firm, Fitch Group, who had lost the transportation contract to Callum by $400,000 on the bid. He was also, though Ray had not known this when the bid was awarded, a man who had spent the previous decade cultivating relationships with 3 members of the county board, 2 of whom had now signed affidavits alleging that the Callum bid had been improperly scored. Ray's attorneys had 46 days to produce the original scoring documentation before the preliminary injunction hearing, and the documentation had disappeared from the county procurement office 3 weeks before the lawsuit was filed. Ray had told his lead attorney on a Tuesday morning that they were going to find it. He had believed this when he said it. He was less certain now. The morning of the hearing, Ray was in his truck at 6:15 in the parking structure 3 blocks from the courthouse, sitting with the engine off, not moving. He had a manila folder on the passenger seat that contained the materials his attorneys had assembled, enough to challenge the affidavits, not enough to prove what had happened to the documentation. The firm would survive a loss. He had modeled it. But 61 people's jobs would not survive a suspended contract and a civil judgment in the same quarter, and he had been building this company for 19 years. And Gerald Fitch had never poured a foundation in his life. And the injustice of this specific situation was the kind Ray could feel in his chest the way he felt cold weather coming, which was in the bone. Before it arrived, his phone buzzed. A text from Petra. It said, "I'm outside the courthouse. Don't park in the structure. Street meter on Wren has 30 minutes on it already. I got here first." He stared at the message for a moment. He had told her about the hearing. He had not told her when it was. She was standing at the meter in a gray wool coat that Ray had never seen before, which meant she had bought it for today. And she was carrying a litigation bag over one shoulder. That was not the kind of bag you carried unless you intended to use what was inside it. She was 26 years old. She had graduated from a state law school 13 months ago and passed the bar on her first sitting and was currently a junior associate at a firm in the city that specialized in public procurement disputes, a specialty she had chosen. She had explained to Ray in a phone call 2 years earlier, because she had grown up watching him fight for contracts, and she wanted to understand the system from the inside. Ray had not said much in response to that. He had set the phone down after the call and stood in his office for a while, not touching anything. He said, "Petra." She said, "I filed an appearance this morning as co-counsel. Your lead attorney knows." She said, "Yes." Ray said, "This is my case." Petra said, "It's about to be mine too." She looked at him with the same flat, measuring gaze she had used on the heating grate at 9 years old, and the system she had developed for sorting people had not changed in 17 years, only improved. She said, "I found the documentation." He said nothing. She said, "The original scoring sheets. The procurement office didn't lose them. They were transferred to an auxiliary records annex on Delford Road in a batch filing 6 weeks before the lawsuit, along with 42 other documents from active bids. Someone flagged them for archival review. The flag was entered by a user whose login credentials belonged to a procurement officer who had been on medical leave for the entire month the flag was entered." She said it the way she said everything, in sequence, without emphasis, letting the facts carry the weight. The credentials were borrowed. "I have the access log. I have the annex transfer record. I have a sworn statement from the records supervisor at Delford Road confirming the documents are there and have not been altered." She handed him a folder. Layer 1. He took it. He looked at the tab which she had labeled in her handwriting, the same tight, economical print she had used on homework assignments at age 12. He said, "What's layer 2? She said, "Gerald Fitch's firm submitted a competing bid on the bridge rehabilitation project in Morrill County 4 years ago. They won that contract. The scoring documentation from that bid shows irregularities identical to the ones he's now alleging in yours. Only in that case, Fitch Dorrell was the beneficiary. I have the Morrill County records. I have a statement from the losing bidder. I have a pattern." She paused. Layer 2. Ray said, "There's a third." She said, "There usually is." She looked at the courthouse entrance. 2 of the board members who signed the affidavits against you received campaign contributions from a Fitch Dorrell subsidiary in the 18 months before the transportation contract was awarded. The contributions are on file with the County Ethics Board. No one has connected them to this case yet. She looked back at Ray. They will today. He had built 19 years of things. He had learned in that time that the most important moment in any construction project was not the pour and not the frame. It was the survey. The moment someone walked the ground carefully and told you what was actually there, what the soil would bear, what the foundation would need to be to hold the structure above it. He had been looking at this courtroom as a place where he would lose something he had built. She had surveyed it before dawn and told him it was ground he could build on. He did not say any of this. He said, "When did you start working on this?" She said, "When you told me about the lawsuit. 8 months ago." He said, "You were working your own caseload." She said, "I know." He said, "Petra," she said, "you fed me a sandwich on a heating grate and then spent 14 months and your entire legal budget making me your daughter. The least I can do is work some nights." She picked up her litigation bag. "We should go in." Courtroom 14 was half full when they arrived. Gerald Fitch was already at the plaintiff's table with 2 attorneys, and he had the physical habit of a man who had won things. He picked up objects that were not his and set them down somewhere else. A legal pad moved 3 inches. A water glass relocated to the edge of the table. Small territorial rearrangements that he made without noticing he made them. He wore a suit that had been cut for him specifically, and he did not look at Ray when Ray came in, which was the particular kind of not looking that required effort. Petra set her bag down at the defense table and began organizing documents with the calm, sequential efficiency of someone who had done this before, which she had, though not at this scale and not with this specific weight attached to the outcome. She arranged the folders in the order she would need them and aligned them with the edge of the table and put a legal pad on top, and then she sat down and was still. The judge entered. The clerk called the case. Ray's lead attorney presented the initial challenge to the injunction. Then, Petra stood. She walked the court through the access logs from the county procurement system, the borrowed credentials, the medical leave, the exact timestamp of the flag entered under a name belonging to someone who had been home recovering from surgery for 3 weeks. She presented the Delford Road transfer records. She introduced the sworn statement from the records supervisor. She was precise, and she was quiet, and she did not perform any part of it. She moved through the evidence the way she moved through everything, in sequence, each piece placed where it belonged, and the picture that assembled itself in the courtroom was not a picture of a man who had cheated. It was a picture of a man who had used the machinery of public record to make evidence disappear and had left his fingerprints on the machinery. When she presented the Morrill County pattern, the room changed. Not loudly. The way a room changes when someone opens a window and the pressure shifts. Gerald Fitch's lead attorney made an objection, and the judge overruled it without looking up from the documents she was reading. When Petra introduced the campaign contribution filings, Gerald Fitch reached for the water glass at the edge of the table and found it was gone. His own rearrangement had moved it out of reach. And he looked at the empty space where it had been, and then at Petra, and then at the judge, and then at the table surface, and the sequence of those looks was the moment the room understood that he had nothing left to reach for. His lead attorney said, "Your Honor, we request a brief recess to confer with our client." The judge said, "Denied. You'll have time to confer after I've read these materials." She said it without heat. She turned a page. The courtroom was very quiet. The preliminary injunction was denied at 11:47. The judge referred the evidentiary record regarding the procurement system access to the County Inspector General and made a note on the record regarding the campaign contribution timeline. Gerald Fitch's attorneys escorted him out of Courtroom 14, and he walked with his eyes forward and did not speak and did not look back. And when the door closed behind him, the physical habit was finally completely gone. There was nothing left to rearrange. Ray was looking at the door. Petra was stacking her folders. He turned and looked at what was on her face, and what was there was not triumph. It was the particular focus of someone who has finished a task they have been working on for 8 months and is now deciding what the next one is. She looked up and found him looking at her, and she said, You need to call your project manager. The county will want to schedule a site review before they release the next payment tranche. He said, Petra. She said, I know. He said, I know you know. She put the last folder in her bag. She said, I was 9 years old on a heating grate and you brought me a sandwich. And you didn't ask me anything. You just sat down. She looked at him. I've been trying to figure out how you repay something like that. He said, you don't. She said, I know. That's why I stopped trying to figure it out and just came. 1 year later. The $14.8 million transportation contract completed on schedule, 2 weeks under budget, with a commendation letter from the county authority entered into the public record. Callum Construction broke ground on a second civic project in April, and the crew at the site dedication numbered 73, because Ray had hired 12 more people in the preceding 8 months, which he had been able to do because the contract had held. Petra made partner track at her firm in the fall, which her managing partner announced at a Friday lunch, and which Petra received with a flat, measuring gaze that meant she had already accounted for this outcome and had moved on to the next calculation. She came to the office on Beller Street twice that month. The heating grate on the sidewalk outside was the same one. The building had been renovated twice since then, but the grate was original infrastructure and had not been replaced, because Ray had quietly asked the property manager about it once, and the property manager had understood, and the way people understand things that are not explained to them, that it was not to be replaced. Petra stood on it for a moment both times, not for long. The way you put your hand on something that used to matter to understand that it still does. Ray watched from the window the second time, and when she came inside she did not mention it, and neither did he, because there are some conversations that are already complete by the time the words would arrive. The red index card came down from the pinboard. In its place, Ray put a white one. He wrote the Transportation Authority commendation number on it and the project completion date and pinned it above the 7 others, and stood back and looked at the board for a moment. And then he went back to work. Some debts cannot be repaid, and were never meant to be. They were meant to be carried forward, with care and without resentment, until the day arrives when you understand that carrying them was never a burden, but a direction, and the moment they were always pointing toward finally comes into view. If someone saved you before you knew you needed saving, and you spent years searching for a way to make it even, would you rather the debt was something you could settle, or something that kept pulling you back to them? Tell us in the comments, because the answer says everything about what you believe a family is. Share this with someone who was given a chance they didn't ask for and built something with it anyway. Subscribe. We are here every week. We read every one.